Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I know that you are joining us from all over the world. Again, welcome to our webinar titled "What Comes Next" under IVDR in 2025. We have two great presenters for you. First, let me introduce Eva Camatini, who is the technical manager for IVDR at IMQ. IMQ is a notified body with many years of experience in medical devices and will soon be designated for IVDR with a team of experts to support you as an IVD manufacturer. Eva's background is on the slide. Eva has more, as you can see, Eva has more than 20 years of experience in various regulatory, quality, and technical manager roles in molecular biology and immunoassays. So we're very pleased to have Eva join us today in our webinar and to give the insights from a notified body perspective. And next is Dr. Oliver Eikenberg, Global IVDR Manager at Pure Global, also with many years of technical experience in working with a wide range of IVDs. Before we get started, our chat function is open, so please feel free to provide questions in the chat, and we will try to address as many as we can during the Q&A following the presentation. And now to Oliver to kick off the presentation.
Okay, thanks for the warm introduction. And just to add, of course, we will share the slides in the end of the presentation with you and also the links together, so you can just relax and listen. So the topics today. We will cover what is different for IVDs compared to medical devices. So I will make a short introduction. Why is the IVDR still challenging for many manufacturers? And I picked out 3 common mistakes. And I saw just in the survey that I picked out the right ones, because this is also what I have seen from many projects for IVDs, that these are common mistakes or common misunderstandings or still challenges. What is the situation for IVDs under IVDR today? And then we will also talk, of course, with the notified body about whatever solutions at the end of each of these problems, and try to identify how this could be improved. So let's start first with a short look on medical devices and the difference to IVDs. So why are IVDs so different? Well, they are more complex. For example, there could be simple reagents. There could be even instruments or parts. For example, a specific instrument or an analyzer together with a mobile specimen receptacle. And as I mentioned, these mobile apps are also a significant part of IVD today. And of course, it could be all of these. It could be included in a kit or in system, and then many of these could apply. Second, there's a range of techniques like immunoassays, lateral flow, genetic testing, next generation sequencing, blood glucose monitoring. So a lot of techniques. And the third aspect, it's a variety of use scenarios. So you have these professional use, lay use, from the IVDR, it's near patient use. So it's not point of care, it's near patient use, what the IVDR covers. And this has to do with different clinical scenarios where it is used. This all is impacting, of course, the way how IVDs are handled. And then we have also the indications for use. So, for example, companion diagnostics, and we have different kind of way how this is done. For example, the automatization. So, is it a combined use? And finally, we also have AI. So everybody's talking about AI, and this is also impacting the IVD world. So second, we have a change in the notified body oversight. I guess everybody is aware of this, how this changed from the IVDD to the IVDR. So we are talking about this now since 2014, when the first compromise draft was published. Yeah, so about over 10 years now. But it is still something where where it is a significant impact on the from the IVDR, that most of these devices will be under notified body control, and that's why we have arranged the seminar together also with the notified body. The general product life cycle and the state-of-the-art approach. This is nothing what is new, but I just put it in here because you see it starts in the upper left side with the design development, manufacturing, then up to the risk management, the clinical evidence, and post-marketing. So it is a life cycle, it is a circle, and it has to do in each of these steps with a lot of standards which have been updated over time. Most of you know risk management, but for example, also labeling. The labeling standard 18113, the series had been updated last year, the symbols for the 15223 -1. So all of this has happened, also clinical evidence. And of course, you need to comply with this. Another aspect, next to the IVDR, there are a lot of specific European regulations or legislation which has been published and updated over time. So for example, the RoHS directive, the RE directive, the REACH directive, the CLP, POP, there's a battery directive just released, and there's a packaging-based directive. So you maybe need to reflect this in your symbols. For example, the most popular is the GHS, so the warning symbols, but also RoHS and the V symbol, so this wheelie bin sticker is required by these directives or regulations. So you need to consider what is applicable for your device, and then you, of course, need to also include this in your technical documentation. So this is reflected in the ISO or in the European legislation. And these apply, of course, fully, most of them, for legacy devices. So you need to handle this already. Just as a short summary for my introduction, you have a higher diversity and complexity of IVDs. You have a lot of safety legislation and, of course, the higher strict notified body control. And this is impacting your quality management system lifecycle, the state of the art, the supply chain, and safety regulations. Okay, so this just as a short intro, but I picked out 3 potential problems you might have. The first is the awareness of the regulations, the quality management system, and understanding of the roles and regulators in the European Union under the IVDR. So there are different roles, regulators and IVD, between regulators and IVD manufacturers. So the regulators have a focus for the safety to patients, for the users, for market surveillance, the higher traceability, for post-marketing. So they check the conformity and compliance. You as a manufacturer might have a completely different perspective, and so you need to follow the IVDR and state-of-the-art standards, then compile the technical documentation in accordance to the IVDR Annex 2 and 3. And of course, you have these supply chain requirements from the importers, distributors, just for example. So this is also a different understanding. So on the one side, you have this check for conformity, and of course, notified bodies or regulators are not allowed to do consultancy. Yeah, they're just checking what you provide to them. So this is a very simple but still a common misunderstanding, because often manufacturers want to have guidance and need this guidance. If the notified bodies do not get this information, they very likely will apply the worst case, specifically if this is not adequately justified. So, of course, and the manufacturers, the challenge is how to justify this and how to adequately justify this. So typical questions we have day by day are, for example, well, these devices, specifically legacy devices, have been on the market since a long time. They are safe. Why do I need to document this? Why do I need to implement these controls? Why we need to now verify these old data and this clinical evidence and do all these things? Well, it's in the regulation and therefore you cannot change it, but it is worth to understand you will not get guidance from the notified bodies. You need to figure out by yourself, or you have consultancy to answer these questions and guide you in the specific way how you present this. So the intention of the regulatory changes is, on the one side, you have these from the European Union harmonization efforts. So, for example, we have a classification system introduced by the IVDR, which is aligned to the IVDRF. We have also the quality management system, UDAMED, UDI for traceability, harmonization, and a lot of standards, and also the guidelines for this. And what I mentioned is that the manufacturer, and specifically then, needs to update their quality management systems, the supply chain for operators, for suppliers, the design control, risk management, UDAMED, UDI, post-market surveillance activities, clinical investigations, and maybe more. Yeah, and this is reflected in the MDCG standards. And you have seen on the right side that more and more documentation was coming up. So finally, you have stricter controls. This is not applicable only to manufacturers. This also affects distributors, importers, but also the European representatives and notified bodies. Why does it matter now? Well, the landscape is changing more and more. So, for example, triggered by the IVDR and MDR, you have in the last year, in 24, there was a general product safety regulation published, also the product liability directive, which have both strengthened the market surveillance and improve consumer protection. Yeah, this is affecting supply chain controls. Even if this is not directly affecting maybe medical devices, it is part of a signal and part of a higher control. What is directly impacting you is maybe UDAMED. So many of you might have seen the UDAMED changes and the gradual rollout planned for 25 and 26, 27. But actual and device module may become mandatory end of 25. So they're already active on a voluntary basis, but when it is published 6 months after the publication date, it will become mandatory. So you need to align to this, you need to get comfortable with this. And if anybody has looked into this already, you would have seen that a lot of more information is included in this. Not only the EMDN codes, a lot of information about the warnings, intended purpose, classification, the countries where these are marketed, etc., etc. And it is traceable. So there's version control, and this is traceable for regulators. This means also all the information can be tracked also after a long time, and also from regulators. So to summarize this, so for the notified body interaction and for your IVDR transition, you need to check your supply chain controls and the applicable regulations or legislation besides the IVDR. You need to document and justify clearly what you have done and why you have done something. And this is important also to reference and in all your planning, all your procedures. So the level of information provided to the notified body must explain this, must justify what you have done. And this is where I want to ask Eva Camatini to give her thoughts about the way how she sees this kind of information and technical documentation and the importance of a good justification.
Yeah, this is a strict point because manufacturers are not used to justify all the information and that they put into the technical documentation because in the past with the directive it wasn't required. Now every information that you put into your TD must be justified and must be supported with the reference, not only to your procedure or to the, for example, MDCG, but also you must refer to standards and often to the guidelines specific for your devices. For example, if your device is for cystic fibrosis, you must refer to the guidelines specific for that kind of disease, because we will see also later for the clinical investigation that many information useful for the manufacturer are also in this kind of guidelines. Yes, you must be very careful about this, and all the information must be consistent in all the technical documentation, because sometimes in our experience we have seen that the information are not always present in all the sections of the technical documentation in the same way. Sometimes they are in contrast, so this can be a problem and can allow to the in this way we need more time to analyze, to assess the technical documentation. So you need more time to reach your goal, the certification of your product.
Yeah. Thanks, Eva. So the consistency is actually, yes, I forgot actually to say this, and this is really an important thing, and I have the same actually problem day by day when I review documents, that consistency is still something what is a problem. Okay, let's move on to the second problem I believe is applicable to many manufacturers, and this is the intended purpose. And in the survey I've seen that this is also something what is under higher discussion for a lot of manufacturers still. So the intended purpose under IVDR, and I just recap what has been changed. So on the one side, under IVD, there were no requirements for an intended purpose defined. However, it changed under IVDR, and I guess many of you are aware of this. So these 8 criteria, which needs to be included in line by line, actually, in the intended purpose. And I just bring here an example of also another notified body who how they check this. So it's really line by line, just to demonstrate that you will not parse the review or the initial review cycle if something is missing or is unclear. Yeah, every single item is actually checked, and it's clear because this defines the classification. What does it mean? So, for example, an IVDD will change from a pure analytical definition, like, for example, to measure a specific parameter in human plasma, into a more defined intended purpose. This parameter is measured in human EDTL plasma on the analyzer, blah, blah, blah. And then the IVD test is intended to be used for human patients in the age or range of whatever, 18 to 65 years, for screening of lung cancer. So the test is not intended to be used for diagnosis or staging of cancer. So here, this is maybe something like an adequate intended purpose, just as an example, and it includes the indication, the target population, and the specific scope and claims of this test. Why is this now a problem? Well, actually, many of you know this. You will not find it in any kind of regulations, but these are marketed with broad terms to a broad community, the old IVDs, because they have just analyzed or just defined the analytical parameter. And of course, many manufacturers believe they have still these good and safe products on the market. I mentioned this before. So manufacture or marketing wants to continue with this broad intended purpose because the limitation might also limit their sales. However, regulatory needs to define this. I already mentioned the paragraph, but it is also reflected in many others, like the IVDR Article 7 or in the classification rules, that this might lead then to higher classification. And of course, you have also this control on, for example, in clinical performance studies or PMPF studies during the ethics committee or to the national competent authority review. So in the end, there's no way to continue with the old concept of the analytical intended purpose. Yeah, you need to change this, but I know that there are significant discussions ongoing between marketing and regulatory departments in IVD companies. Why is it required for an efficient design and development process? Actually, the intended purpose drives the classification rules, the IVDR annex, and the PE process finally for the whole PE planning, for the scientific validity, analytical performance, clinical performance, and finally the clinical evidence, which is then demonstrated and compiled in a performance evaluation report. So consequences of an inadequate intended purpose is that you cannot adequately conduct design and development or plan risk management or usability. You cannot identify the relevant state of the art. So what is applicable, and you cannot conduct scientific validity because if you don't have defined the target population or claims. So what kind of literature will you select and how will you appraise these adequately? It's actually not possible. You cannot adequately plan your analytical and clinical performance studies without the intended purpose. And this might then limit also the way for writing an adequate justification. So the notified body might then not be able to accept this and launch your application or accept an agreement. Yeah, simply because the notified body needs to verify the classification to write an offer. And this, as a short summary, so please make sure to check the intended purpose, make sure all criteria are included, and then consistently that these are used consistently in the technical documentation. And again, Eva, maybe you have also some experience with this kind of intended purpose and these first step interaction with manufacturers about this topic.
Yes. What I've seen is that manufacturers usually try to summarize the intended use because they think that they are not important and because professional users know the product, but this is not a correct approach. My suggestion is to follow each specific point of the regulation of the Annex 2 for the completeness of intended use. As you told before, intended use is the base for the to correctly qualify and classify the device, and this is the first information that a notified body receive and can evaluate the application of the manufacturer based on the intended use. Usually, the suggestion is to report into the application form the complete intended use that the manufacturer has decided and to apply to the device, and that is written in the technical documentation and in the instructions for use. In fact, if the notified body has some doubt about the classification or the qualification of the device, usually he asks to the manufacturer for the instructions for use to have a better idea and to evaluate to see that there is a correspondence between the two informations. Yes, this is. Yes, this is my consideration. Yes, don't Yes, okay. No.
Yeah, thanks. I guess this is in line
Yeah.
with what I find, and this is what manufacturers should avoid. So these back and forth and these kind of discussions. So this is very helpful. Just this information. Yeah. So problem number 3 is the adequate level of clinical evidence under IVDR. So this is also a very, very common question. So what is the adequate level? Well, I have explained that this is already driven by the intended purpose. So usually the approach is that the intended purpose drives the scientific validation, also the analytical and clinical performance. And I've also mentioned that clinical performance data are updated and are also, I included here the NVCG document 2022-19 for performance study application notification documents under the regulation. So if you plan or if you conduct already clinical performance studies, it is worth to look at these, because these include the intended purpose, the classifications, the GSPR, and of course all this must be submitted under IVDR criteria. So the adequacy for clinical evidence is based on the intended purpose, and the claims will now be reviewed in much more detail. And this is not only through the clinical performance studies, but of course, and finally also by notified bodies or for the EMA, if, for example, for companion diagnostics, or from national competent authority, if they're involved. The general information, what is the adequate level? Well, it should be risk-based, it should be explained, it should be justified. It's solely the manufacturer's responsibility to define and justify this, but in general, you can say the higher the risk, the higher and the more likely it is that clinical performance study data are required. But of course, it depends on the way how you have done your analytical performance testing. So, for example, with a lot of clinical samples, maybe real samples, and on the parameter itself. Yeah, and of course, on the scientific validity, what is the specific risk depending on the claims for this kind of device? And of course, this might be also then old data which have been collected in line with the state-of-the-art standards. So, for example, 29116 or before the 13612 standard. And also here for the interaction, well, clinical evidence should be collected and documented to a level that allows a qualified assessment from the notified body of the device safety as intended by the manufacturer. Therefore, it is really required that also the information, maybe clinical data, are conducted to good study practice criteria, and that this is clearly justified and explained with the respective information. So again, Eva, maybe a few words for this clinical evidence or for these clinical performance studies. So what are your experience? What is your experience on this?
Yes, manufacturers need help for this activity, because it's very complex, and only for Class D devices, we will see later, we have a common specification that give the information about how many samples and which kind of test or clinical performance must be done for each specific parameter, for each specific target, sorry. But for Class C and Class B devices, we have nothing like a common specification. So it's the responsibility of manufacturer, but manufacturer can use information taken from the literature, from the guidelines specific for the disease or for the target, or guidelines like CL. I don't know. Sorry. CLSI, yes, sorry, CLSI or GHTF and so on. So, and of course, the The amount of the samples are important. You must apply statistical a statistical approach for some performance, but of course you have also the limit for some target, the limit of number of biological samples available. So you can use some strategies, for example, the use of plasmids or in negative matrix or something like this. The important thing again is to justify your choice. And then you can discuss with the notified body, and you can support, and the justification can support your choice and can help you to see your technical documentation approved.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, great. And this perfectly leads me to the next topic. What is then the timeline and situation for IVD manufacturers today and what matters? So actually and we will recap a little bit of what Eva and I have said. So categories of IVDs under IVDR. So you have these old devices placed on the market. Of course, you have these IVDR devices, so specifically class A, but also other who might be already under IVDR and are not legacy devices, but then you have these legacy devices. And I believe many of these on the market are still legacy devices. And many will still believe that these staggered timelines are the final timelines. It's not the starting point, it's the end timelines that they will not, or maybe you have not started to act because you believe you have a long time. So I will focus a little bit on these because we have some transitional provisions for these legacy devices introduced by the European Commission. And one is applying in May 2025. And this is only 2 months left to have a QMS already, IVDR ready, according to the Article 10.9. So application to be lodged with the notified body then will, depending on the class, will depend on the May timelines, so May 25, 26, 27 for different risk classes, so D, C, and B, or class A sterile devices, and then the agreement to be signed with the notified body. Before then, the final IVDR deadline for legacy devices is end of the respective year then. So finally, you have 27 months, I guess, for the notified body review in theory, but you need to consider that why these have been implemented. Well, the QMS is implemented because simply many manufacturers are not following these basic rules and these basic requirements. Is it checked at this stage? We will see on the next slide then how this works for the QMS, how this works for the application and the agreement. But definitely these are critical steps for IVD manufacturers, and these are end dates where these needs to be in place. So it's really important that you act before these dates, long before these dates. Yeah. So there is some kind of explanation in Q&A for the this extension of the transitional periods published in July 2024. So. And one of these questions is question 9, which evidence does a manufacturer have to provide for having put in place a quality management system in accordance with the IVDR? And the answer is that the QMS should be in condition to ensure that manufacturers gradually move towards full compliance with the IVDR requirements, and that manufacturers must draw up the documentation on its QMS by this date. So it's very easy to track that manufacturers have done this by this date. Usually you have version control, you have everything traceable, or you should have in your quality management system. Therefore, it's even possible for regulators and maybe also notified bodies to track if this had been in place or not, even if this is done in 27 or whatever. Yeah, so they will find out. For example, the IVDR or these articles also require that you must establish a performance evaluation procedure. This describes how you will conduct the scientific validity, analytical performance, and clinical performance to address the clinical evidence. If you are writing a procedure, it should not state or recap everything what is in the IVDR. It should explain how you are doing this. And this means you typically should also have some responsibilities, maybe also already templates to demonstrate how you will do this. So it is not enough just to state, okay, we will follow the IVDR rules and just recite these what you shall do. Please make sure that you write down how you will do this and maybe also who will do this, inside your company. And this is a significant difference. The next is then the application to be lodged. So what are the necessary documents or elements for the formal application? Well, the application should in principle include the elements, is the answer, listed in the relevant conformity assessment as referred to the annexes 9 and 10. And then the QA document states that it needs to be taken into account that a full review of the application, so this this application status, okay, prior to the conclusion of the written request is not required. However, the application must clearly identify the manufacturer and the devices covered by the application. The information submitted with the application and needs to allow the notified body to verify the qualification of the products, their classification, and the chosen conformity assessment procedure. And this means that the consequences at the application stage could be that there are significant discussions between the notified body and the manufacturer, for example, for intended purpose for the classification. And they could also reject your application. Then you need to search for another notified body. So notified body have already communicated that they also would put you at the end of the deadlines or at the end of the queue if you do not meet these criteria. So you have no evidence then that this is really done from the notified body in the remaining time. Second is then for Class D devices. So application to be lodged is also 2 months just left to lodge the application with the notified body. Well, for the Class D devices, we have a significant or the highest risk class. We have actually 2 categories. We have the old Class D devices. These are the ones which are maybe list A devices before and are already established in European reference laboratories. So there is already a procedure in place from the European reference laboratory, from the notified body. The manufacturers are already used to have the quality management system. They are already audited for this. So it's maybe a small difference only to the IVDR. But for the new devices, this is a significant step because everything is new, and also not for the manufacturer, but also for the European reference laboratory and the notified body. So this is a complex process, the most complex process. And there are, Eva mentions this, common specifications are not established for all Class D parameters. So the identification of an adequate European reference lab and then defining the test panels might take longer than expected. So the new Class D devices might also require longer timelines for selection of not only for the laboratory, but selection of test panels, and this might require multiple testing cycles. And just as a side note, maybe SARS-CoV-2 will be downclassified because it is not considered life-threatening anymore. So if this is done, it's not yet officially, but if this would happen, then this would also change the classification and the way how notified bodies will then control this. And of course, it will impact the timelines for the transitional timelines. So as a summary, long notified body review timelines based on step-by-step information from the European Reference Laboratory and manufacturing review timeline will strongly depend also on the precise demonstration of state-of-the-art and accurate performance data. Actually here, just summarized, you need to plan adequately for this. You need to align with your notified body as early as possible, and specifically for Class D parameters to discuss this. And for the adequate timelines, consider that notified body need to arrange other TD assessments as well, and plan to have multiple review cycles. The higher the risk device is and the lower the evidence is you provide. So, Eva, what is your opinion on these Class D or these overall timelines for the application process?
Well, it is advisable to contact the notified body you have chosen and to define and to know you have to ask to the notified body which kind of document must be provided together with the application form. For example, all the documents related to the QMS must be provided, and pay attention. Consider that it's not enough to take a procedure and change the reference to the directive with the reference to the IVDR. The content must be reviewed because each procedure must strictly follow the regulation. Manufacturers think that in this way they can they can give to the notified body the documents in a shorter time, but this is not a correct approach because the notified body when evaluate the documents can decide not to proceed with that manufacturer because he thinks that that manufacturer is not ready for the assessment. So be careful, review all your QMS procedure, and for the application, usually is enough to present not all the technical documentation, but only the information related to the devices. That means intended use and all the elements that are included in the device description. That is the point 1, the section 1.1 of the Annex 2. So if you follow all those points, you can provide the information, the complete information on your device that can allow the notified body to evaluate it, to accept your application.
Great. And I guess you have underlined the importance of the to act carefully, to act with intent, to act also starting these quality management system, and also elements of the technical documentation to prepare adequately and for lodging an application. Again, it doesn't make sense. You need to do this anyway. So I guess the overall message is, check your data, check your level of documentation, accuracy for documents, consistency, and then finally you should be able to do this and to do specifically the pre-application or the application process and lodge the application, and finally the agreement with the notified body, because this is maybe the next really important step, and this is something what you should easily and hopefully can make. So actually, with this, we are at the end of our official webinar, but we will, of course, open the session for question and answers. So please feel free to ask whatever you want. I guess maybe there are already some questions in the overall chat.
And Michael, there is some questions on your screen right now. The first question is, for legacy devices transitioning under IVDR, how do we balance retrospective clinical data gaps with the new requirements for continuous performance evaluation, especially for Class CD devices?
Yeah, this is give me a second. Yeah. So actually, okay. So for legacy devices, so it depends where you are and where you, of course, how much data you have collected before. So I have explained just in this webinar that how the intended purpose and the scientific validity drives this. So it depends on how you have already collected or how your intended purpose is and how this is reflecting also your current intended purpose and the claims. So depending on this, you might need to redo the scientific validity. You might identify, of course, then and double check the adequacy of your clinical data. And of course, this needs to be then checked in light of the state-of-the-art state-of-the-art standards, also the clinical performance standards. And because these are simply every clinical data, must be collected, or if this is an external, must be then collected under an ethically approved conditions. So, and all these standards. So even before the ISO 29016 was published, there was the EN 13612 and the ISO 14155 for the ethical approval and this. So I've seen a lot of scenarios where clinical data are provided to the notified body. But finally, the notified body question was simply, okay, but is this really clinical performance testing on patients because this can be accepted. Only clinical investigations can be accepted if they are ethically approved. And in the end, only maybe 1 of 10 has been correctly approved. So, and this defines where you are and how this can be done. If you do this retrospectively, definitely you should write a very clear justification pointing out how the intended purpose is reflected, how the studies and the clinical data are collected in light of the ISO 29016. I would also include then the references to the federal opinion from the ethics, to the statistics, to the national competent authority approval for these data. And then, it might be also helpful to have to include the equivalent or similar devices you have collected and the information from these to support the clinical evidence.
Perfect. I think we can solve 2 more questions previous to conclude the event. So the other question is, how can we leverage existing clinical datasets from non-European markets to satisfy IVDR's stricter clinical evidence requirements without duplicating studies?
Yeah, I guess this is a similar answer from my side. Well, finally, it's of course every country has own requirements. If you have multi-country study or plan to do this also from non-European markets, well, if you want to go to the European market, finally you must verify that it meets the legislation from the European market. So again, the standards must be included, and then you need to take this information and provide also the ethics approval, all these conditions, how you have collected these devices. And finally, it goes back to the same question that the qualification must be there, especially the site qualification, the testing of the laboratories, the GSP training. So all this must be conducted under European legislation at least, or similar to this, and you must verify this. Yeah. So this is finally how the notified body will very likely decide on this.
Perfect. So I think the last question, this can be the last question, as is, how should we approach technical documentation structuring to expedite notified body reviews while avoiding costly rework?
Yeah. Okay. So the structure of the technical documentation is actually defined by the IVDR, so Annex 2 and 3. If you have multiple IVDs, for example, a grouping might be a good approach so that you can at least summarize this and then put it or submit it for a group. Expedite is, this is something what Eva would need to comment, but usually in expedite is a higher rate always. I would more focus on the efficiency in structuring this, because only an efficient and a good structure is then good for the reviewer. There's no official published structure from in the regulation. So many notified bodies have published similar whatever kind of structures. So it needs they're maybe slightly different, but they include all the elements and they include all the specifics. So it doesn't matter if you have the information in number 3.4 or 3.6. It is just that it is that you show how this is structured. It is following the annexes. It is following the elements of this, and that this is then searchable and organized for the notified body review. Yeah, so this is actually what you need to have. And of course, you need to have a quality management procedure for this, where you explain how this will be done.
Yeah, I just add one consideration.
Yep.
A summary is required. It is a very simple element, but usually manufacturers don't think about it. So a summary where you define where you show how the structure of your technical documentation is, and of course, as Oliver said, the best way is to strictly follow the regulation, the Annex 2 and Annex 3. If you follow the regulation, you will be sure that notified body will take less time to find the information. Okay. Usually, the notified bodies, each notified body provide a guideline on the structure of the technical documentation. So I'm sure that the notified body you choose can give you the information on this topic. Of course, contact the notified body as soon as possible, and because we have a lot of work and we need time to put together all the requests. I mean, all the notified bodies. So the less time you spend to define your accord, and the less time, of course, notified body will take to evaluate your technical documentation. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yes, great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Eva.
Thank you too.
Thank you very much, Oliver. Great content. Great feedback. Thank you both very much for sharing your insights. We did not get any burning questions from the audience, but we of course want to give everyone the opportunity to reach out to us. There's a QR code on the screen that will lead you to our website and a contact form. So if you have any questions for Oliver or Eva that you would like to have answered after the the presentation after the webinar, please feel free to submit those, and we'll be happy to reach out to you and have a discussion on how on the things that you may want to start working on to start or continue to be successful in selling your IVDs in the European Union, because that in the end, of course, is the goal. You want to make sure you can keep your products on the market and have a successful business in the European Union. So thank you all for attending. Again, thank you, Eva. Thank you, Oliver. And we wish everyone a great rest of the day or night, wherever you are in the world. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you for joining. Bye.
Bye.